every time there's a natural disaster here, I mean, every single time, there are complaints about government's response. Federal, state, doesn't matter. You know, it was too slow, it was too disorganised. Where are my payments already? You got to ask, are our governments really that hopeless, or are people expecting instant service even when all hell has broken loose? And this time again with the floods. Complaints of the Morrison government, for instance, didn't send in enough military helicopters for rescue. And only 2,000 armed forces people are on the job at the moment. Well, the New South Wales Premier sure heard about that today.
I know it's a logistical nightmare, but we've got one of the best armies in the world. Why couldn't we get stuff in?
Yeah, maybe that's a good point. There soon will be 5,000 soldiers on deck. And there were particularly complaints, angry Facebook posts that people in some towns had to do dangerous rescues themselves and raise money for their own helicopters when they didn't get help. 20 tonnes of essential goods are so far being delivered by privately owned helicopters, according to some sources, and journalists have been scathing.
And when you've got people, communities hiring their own helicopters and putting their money together and hiring their own boats to go out and give food out, there is something wrong.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think there's something very healthy and right about Australians helping each other and themselves in a disaster, not sitting back waiting for the government to turn up, particularly in a mega one like this. All hands on deck. The question is if the government did enough. Now, I have to say that some of the complaints publicised by the ABC, for instance, sounded absurd. Someone from Willenbar, why do we still have no phone coverage, no EFTPOS? And this is when rescuers are still flat out. I mean, damage like that is not fixed in an hour. But Premier Dominic Perrottet, he looked absolutely rocked by the sheer volume of complaints, which does suggest that mistakes were made, or that Perrottet would rather say sorry than defend his rescuers.
There's no doubt that in some of the smaller communities there's a sense of abandonment, and I feel very sorry about that.
There were some people that were told, don't go and rescue others, leave it to the Defence Force. Had they not, these people would have been dead.
There's not one or two stories, there's hundreds of these stories that I've heard over the last few days. What do you take from that? Well, in an unprecedented, unpredicted event, the catastrophe that it is, that shouldn't have to happen.
Joining me is the political panel, Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal President, and Steve Conroy, former Labor Senator and Cabinet Minister. Steve Conroy, you know, every time there is a disaster, you get the complaints, some of them politically motivated, but others genuine, sometimes not genuine. How serious are these ones, do you think, particularly for Prime Minister Scott Morrison, of course?
Well, I think the point you just made earlier about the fact that there's 2,000 troops on the ground and soon there'll be 5,000. I mean, the magnitude of this suggests that the initial response, at least, was not enough. Perrottet, you just saw there. He's apologising. He knows that this is genuine anger. That there's no whipped up political campaign behind the scenes. This is fury from people on the ground who've been saving lives. They've been doing the right thing, and they're just furious with Perrottet and Morrison for not getting their act together. And the other thing, I mean, there's three elements to it. There's beforehand. There is a huge fund been set up to do a number of different things. Firstly is mitigate, and secondly is rebuild. And I think if you look at the mitigation, the very valid point's been made, there's not enough been done in mitigation in a range of areas. There's not enough money's been spent, given that there's this huge funds been set aside to do it. Then there's the rebuild. You've just got to look at what's happened still down after the bushfires. There's still people who are bitterly angry that the rebuild hasn't really gone fast enough down in and around the bushfires in the southern coast of New South Wales. So I think governments are not demonstrating they can do their knitting. Like, it's at times like this you step up, you do go in hard, you go in as fast with as much as you can get. Then you set up funds to try and make sure it doesn't happen again, and you set up funds to make sure you rebuild as fast as you can. So I think all of that drives at the competence question. Certainly Morrison, and Perrottet is still on learning plates, but he's already come out, as you saw, and apologised. He knows this is a stuff up that he should have done better at.